Welcome back. We're going to do a 45-minute vinyasa today, and we're going to go ahead and start in a seat on the mat. So if you prefer to sit in a cross-legged position, something with maybe the shins crossed in front of one another or the ankles crossed in front of one another, or if you'd like to come up to the knees to sit back on the heels or in between the heels, we're just looking for that place where we can find both a nice steady posture with that upright spine, so we're not kind of impeding the breath in any way, but also that place that you're comfortable to sit in for a few minutes. So taking your time, grabbing any props you'd like to find that position, and then starting to settle into it, maybe even closing the eyes, resting the hands on the knees, in the lap, whatever's most comfortable. We'll go ahead and start by dropping into our breath as well. So find an exhale on your own, getting all of that air out. And then go ahead and inhale deeply through the nose, trying to fill up all the way with air, kind of reminding those lungs how much air they can take in. And then once you kind of reach your limit, go ahead and exhale out of the mouth. Let's do one more just like that. Inhale deeply through the nose. Maybe that biggest breath of the day. Then sigh it out of the mouth. Then if you're comfortable with it, maybe sealing those lips and starting to breathe both in and out of the nostrils. Still finding those long, deep, calm inhales, but also trying to match it with those long, calm exhales as well. Maybe moving towards something like that Samavriti pranayama, where both our inhales and our exhales are equal in length, equal in rate, so we can start to find that balance of the nervous system. Finding that place where we're calm but not sleepy, and we're alert and ready to move but not anxious. Finding that perfect middle ground for that movement with the breath. So taking a few more, about 30 seconds, maybe 3 or 4 more rounds of breath, kind of find that balance, really settle into that breath. Maybe one more round here. And you can take this breath practice with you, but we're going to start to move as we bring our arms up overhead. Maybe you can even bring that gaze up towards the hands. And then we're going to drop that right hand down, bring it back behind us as that left hand comes over to the right leg, maybe that right knee if we're in that cross-legged seat, finding this gentle twist. We can bring that gaze to the right, but if you'd like to involve that neck in the twist a little bit more, you can also kind of gaze back behind that right shoulder, maybe towards the back of the room. And then we'll untwist, bring those arms back up overhead, and then drop your left hand back behind you as that right hand comes to the outside of your left leg. Same thing here, option to just gaze to the left or maybe bring that gaze back behind you. This doesn't need to be your deepest twist, especially these first twists of the class. Just finding whatever you need to kind of wake up that twisting motion, that twisting plane of the spine. Then we'll untwist, once again, bringing your arms up overhead. This time we're going to drop that right hand down, but bring it down beside us so we can reach tall with that left arm and bring it up and over, finding this side body stretch as we lengthen through that left side body. And kind of come back up to center slowly as we rotate down so that left hand comes down, right arm comes up and over to find that opposite side body stretch. We'll do that one more time each side. So we come up to center, then continue down to the right. Right hand plants, left arm comes up and over. Then back through center. Left hand drops, right arm up and over. And as those arms come up to center, we'll just bring those hands down to that seat, down to the lap or the knees. Take a breath here. Then from your seat, we're going to make our way to our tabletop position. So if you'd like to kind of kick those legs off to the side, aligning on the mat, finding that place in the center where we can bring our hands and wrists underneath our shoulders, our knees underneath our hips. We're going to make sure that we start in that straight spine position, starting to find that core engagement. So notice that as we engage the core, that belly button comes up towards the spine, so we can make sure that from that tailbone through the top of the head, we have that straight line. Then once we have that engagement, starting to move from here, drop that belly down, tilt the pelvis forward as the chest and gaze comes up, finding our cow pose. And then we round the back, tuck the tailbone underneath, chin towards the chest, feeling that stretch between the shoulder blades, finding that cat pose. Now bringing that breath into it as we inhale down to cow, and then allowing that exhale to take us to cat. Then continue here, your pace, your breath. You can stay in these cat-cow motions. You can also kind of find different directions of movement, maybe kind of bringing one shoulder closer to the hip than the other, kind of getting a little bit more into the side body, maybe moving a little bit forward and back, left and right, taking whatever movement you need to kind of wake up the spine and the hips, but also kind of connect to how it's moving today. Maybe it's a little bit different than yesterday. This is that area that you can kind of start to familiarize yourself with how that body's feeling today. Let's take one more round of breath. Then we'll meet back in that starting tabletop position. From here, we're going to start to walk our hands further up the mat, maybe coming to the top of the mat, maybe even a little bit off the mat, as we keep those hips up over our knees and slowly start to drop that chest down towards the mat. We can kind of stay here in this hover, or we can drop that forehead down. Maybe if you're feeling a little bit more open, we can bring that gaze forward as the chin comes down to the mat, maybe even the chest touches. Still focusing on bringing those hips up over the knees. We don't want those hips coming too far forward here. Finding that big stretch, that big opening in the back of the heart space, also opening the front of the heart space. One more breath here. Then we gently rise that chest up, starting to walk those hands back towards tabletop. We're going to eventually come to downward facing dog. So if you know you like that stance a little bit longer, we can keep those hands a little bit further forward once you find your length, tucking those toes to bring your hips up and back, finding that first down dog of class. If you'd like to find some movement here, maybe that pedaling of the heels, dropping one down as the other rises, kind of getting into the back of the legs. Maybe that little shift left and right of the hips, kind of getting a little bit more into the side body. Or we can start to find that pose here in stillness, maybe pushing into the hands, the fingertips, the knuckles, the palms, so we can push those hips up and away. Taking that weight out of the shoulders, trying to find that straight line from the wrists to the hips. If you need to bend the knees to find that shape, that's okay. And then wherever we are, we energetically drive those heels down towards the mat. Then from this down dog, we're going to come up on our tiptoes, look between our hands as we slowly walk those feet to meet the hands at the front of the mat, finding a forward fold. We can stay here in this kind of uttanasana, this straightforward forward fold, or we can widen the stance. Bend those knees super generously, almost making that shelf for the stomach, so we can release that upper torso down towards the mat. Maybe grabbing opposite elbows or just kind of releasing those hands down to the mat, allowing gravity to come up and assist by kind of like pulling down, finding that release in those areas of tension, that upper back between the shoulder blades, the shoulders themselves, the neck, the head. Take one more breath here. Maybe bringing those feet back to hips width distant, bringing those hands underneath the shoulders as you slowly rise up to standing, coming to that first Tadasana, our first mountain pose here. Finding real sensation of grounding in the feet. So all four corners, that's that big toe mound, the pinky toe mound, and the left and right of the heel, all four equally grounding into the mat. Maybe a little micro bend in the knees. We're going to find that same engagement we talked about in tabletop. So we find that neutral pelvis, that belly button coming to the spine so that pelvis isn't leaning forward, back, left, or right, but it's kind of straight up and down, right underneath the shoulders. Shoulders relax, arms come alongside us as the top of the head feels like it's growing even taller up to the ceiling. This really strong, balanced, grounding feeling, that state of samastitihi in our Tadasana pose. Then we'll find movement from here. With an inhale, we'll bring our arms up overhead, gazing up towards those hands. And then an exhale folds us forward, coming to our Uttanasana, forward fold. Inhale, rising up halfway to that flat back. Kind of extending tall through the top of the head towards the front of the room. And then on your next exhale, fold again, plant the hands, step back to plank pose. Same engagement as Tadasana here, that same feeling in the core. So we find that straight line through the body. We're just pushing through the hands to move those shoulders away from the mat. You can also always find this from the knees. Whether on our knees or on our toes in that plank, we're just going to bring our shoulders slightly past our wrist. Keep those elbows tight as we start to bend at the elbows, slowly lowering ourselves all the way down to the mat. We can untuck the toes, engage the legs so those kneecaps kind of lift away. Make sure those hands are still planted equally, fingertips right behind the shoulders. And then we lift that chest up and away, finding that cobra pose. Doesn't need to be your deepest expression here. Maybe we're still gazing down right in front of us on the mat, finding that baby cobra. And then we lower back down. Tuck the toes, either come up to tabletop or to plank pose. And then we meet back in downward facing dog. Take a breath here. At the end of that exhale, bend the knees, look between the hands, step, jump, or float, feet to meet the hands. So we meet back at the top of the mat. Inhale to a halfway lift. Exhale, fold forward. Inhale, we rise all the way up, arms coming up overhead again, looking up this full extension, Urdhva Hastasana. Our exhale has us fold forward again. Hands down towards your feet. Inhale, halfway lift, that Ardha Uttanasana. Exhale, plant the hands, step back to plank. Once again, either on the toes or on the knees. If you like lowering all the way down to cobra, find that again. But another option is bringing those shoulders past the wrist, bending down just halfway, 90 degrees at the elbow for chaturanga. We flip the feet, bring the chest up and through, thighs off the mat, upward facing dog. Then we'll all meet in downward facing dog. Take another breath here. After that exhale, bend the knees, look between the hands, step, jump, or float, feet to meet the hands. Inhale, halfway lift. Exhale, fold. Inhale, rise all the way up, arms coming up overhead. We'll find one more sun salutation A. Exhale folds us forward to your Uttanasana. Inhale, halfway lift. Exhale, find any series of movements you'd like to get to that downward facing dog. That can be those two options we talked about, either lowering down to cobra, coming down halfway to upward facing dog. Can always just be stepping back to down dog. Can be your own series of movements. Those little vinyasas, those sun salutations, always feel free to make it your own. Choose what you need in the moment. Doesn't need to be picking one now. and kind of carrying it throughout class. But each time you find one, see what the body needs in that moment. We'll find one more breath here in this down dog. After your exhale, bending the knees, look between the hands, step, jump, or float. Inhale, halfway lift. Exhale, fold. Inhale, rising all the way up back to that Urdhva Hastasana, that full extension. We're going to keep those arms up overhead as we start to sit those hips back. Like we're coming to sit in a chair here, finding that chair pose. Our weight kind of comes back into the heels a little bit more, kind of coming out to that four-corner grounding we talked about. But we're also finding that same engagement that we find in Tadasana in the core. We don't want that belly splaying forward, those hips rotating forward. We want that straight line here. So find that engagement. Arms up by the ears. Maybe you lower a little bit more. And on your next exhale, fold forward. Inhale, halfway lift. Exhale, plant the hands. Find any movement you like to get back to downward facing dog. Making it your own here. But eventually we all meet in that downward facing dog. From this down dog, we're going to lift that right heel up to the sky. Coming to our three-legged dog, trying to drive that heel up, that foot kind of coming back towards that back wall, trying to keep equal weight in the hands. And then we'll slowly start to bring that right knee towards our nose, almost rounding that back like cat pose. We find that space, we can step our right foot between the hands. Doesn't need to be one big step. It can be as many steps as you need. Eventually finding that right foot between the hands, we're going to lower that left knee down. So as we rise, we come to that low lunge. Taking a few minutes here to explore our low lunge. Can either be kind of this really tall variation where we keep that weight up over that left knee, maybe even squeezing those glutes to feel that lengthening through the front of that left leg. If you prefer, maybe you can bend deeply into that right knee, kind of pushing the hips forward. We're just looking for that sensation, that stretch through the front of that left hip flexor, the left quad. So which kind of ever point gives you that sensation, go ahead and find that. Can also always kind of be movement back in between the two of those. Doesn't need to be that kind of static hold. Then from your low lunge, we're going to start to straighten our right leg so we can fold over that right leg, finding half splits. Those hips can come back a little bit to help you find that fold, but we kind of like that puppy dog pose that we did in the beginning. We want to keep that weight kind of over that left knee here. And then we'll gently bend back into that right knee, coming up to low lunge. And then we'll bring those hands down to frame that right foot. You can tuck the back toes, step that right leg back to plank. If you'd like, find a vinyasa. Or we can just move to downward facing dog. As we land in downward facing dog, we lift the left heel this time. Bring that left knee towards the nose, finding the space that we can step that left foot between the hands. One big step or as many steps as we need. We drop the right knee down and rise up to your low lunge on this second side. Once again, taking the time to kind of feel that point that gives you that sensation you're searching for in the front of that right leg this time. Maybe different than the other side, maybe a little bit more deep of a bend in that front knee. Once again, reminding you that that movement kind of back and forth between them is an option. And then we'll start to straighten the left leg so you can fold over your left leg, finding that half splits, Ardha Hanumanasana. Hands can always come down to the mat or blocks. If you're kind of working on a little bit of balance, you can always bring them kind of back behind you. And then we'll bend back into the left knee, come up to our low lunge, and then hands down to frame the left foot, tucking the back toes, stepping back to plank. Another chance for a vinyasa here, or you can find downward facing dog. Once we get to that downward facing dog, we're going to come to a child's pose. So bringing the knees down to the mat, bringing those hips back towards the heels as the chest and forehead melt down towards the mat. Arms can stay out long in front of us, or they can kind of wrap around alongside the legs. Finding this first little place of constructive rest. This area that we can find, whether it be a pose or a movement or whatever your body's kind of calling for. So you can kind of reconnect to that breath that we were cultivating at the beginning of class. Sometimes when we move, it can feel like that breath rate increases, the heart rate increases. So kind of finding time, finding space, finding stillness to slow down and find that breath can kind of help us out. It's also a place that if you feel like maybe your focus has drifted away from the mat, whether you're thinking about yesterday or tomorrow, maybe you're worrying or stressing, take that time to come back to the mat, come back to your focus. Oftentimes when we come back to that breath, we're also coming back to that focus. But anytime you feel like you need that reconnect or that moment of stillness, feel free to find it. Don't need to wait for me to cue you there. Take it when you need it. Stay there as long as you'd like. But we'll take one more breath here in this down dog. Or child's pose, sorry. And then from that child's pose, making your way to downward facing dog. That can be coming up to tabletop first, taking your time to get there, or it can be tucking those toes from that child's pose, bringing those hips up and back to that downward facing dog. Then from our down dog, once again, bending your knees, look between your hands, step, jump, or float, feet to meet the hands. Inhale, halfway lift. Exhale, fold. Inhale, rising all the way up, arms coming up overhead. Once again, we sit those hips down like we're coming into that chair, finding our chair pose. And on your next exhale, fold forward. Inhale, halfway lift. Exhale, plant the hands, find a vinyasa if you'd like, or just move back to downward facing dog. From that down dog, once again, lifting your right heel up to the sky, up to the ceiling, finding our three-legged dog, then bringing that knee in towards the nose, finding the space, stepping our right foot between the hands, dropping our left knee, rise up to your low lunge. Finding your pose here, your stability. But as we talked about in Tadasana earlier, I want you to focus on that front foot. I want you to really notice the grounding of all four corners of that front right foot here. Kind of notice how that foot will stay here throughout these next poses that we find. So find that grounding now and it will support you as you move. But once we have that grounding, we're going to make our way to a one-legged Tadasana. So this may be a little bit different of a transition than you're used to. So take your time. But maybe tucking those back toes so we can push off of that left foot, lifting that left knee up in front of us, one-legged Tadasana. You can also kind of drag that left foot forward, kind of slowly bringing the toes up. And then once they come in line, we can lift that left knee up. Finding that Ekapada Tadasana. And then we're going to slowly bring that left leg back behind us, extending out so we can gently land our left toes, finding a high crescent lunge. Here, we're going to try and find that tailbone tucked underneath the spine. So just like that chair pose, we don't want that belly splaying forward. So maybe that means bending that back knee or shortening the stance. That will give us that best sensation through the front of that left leg, still opening up the front of the body here. Arms up by the ears. And then we'll bring those hands down to frame that right foot, stepping the right foot back. Option for a vinyasa, or just move to downward facing dog. Then we come to that second side as the left heel lifts. Left knee comes towards the nose, finding the space to step it between our hands. And then once you have that, we drop the right knee, come up to our low lunge. Find that grounding through that left foot, all four corners here. So when you're ready, you can tuck those back toes, either push off or drag to bring that right knee up in front of us. Maybe as you come to the balance, you kind of wobble back and forth between all four of those corners, but focus on pushing them all down. That will help us find that balance. And then we bring that right leg back behind us so we can gently land the right toes, finding that second high crescent lunge. Maybe this pose is a little bit different than the last side. This hip may be a little bit less open, maybe a little bit more open. So maybe you don't need to bend the knee. Maybe you need to bend it a little deeper. That's okay. Treating each side individually. Then when you're ready, bring those hands down to frame that left foot. Step it back to plank. Find downward facing dog, however you'd like. Let's take a breath here in down dog. We're going to find that again, adding a little bit more on. So lift that right heel up. Bring that right knee towards the nose. Plant the right foot between the hands. Drop the left knee. We rise to that low lunge. Find that grounding of the right foot. Drag or push off the left foot to come up to that one-legged Tadasana. This time, as we bring that left leg back behind us, we're going to come to a warrior three. So pausing in this balance for a moment. Keeping that torso in line with that back leg. What that means, that if that back toes are only a little bit off of the mat, that chest will be a little bit higher. But if that left heel is all the way in line with the hips, we bring that torso down in line with the hips to kind of find that big uppercase T. And then from our warrior three, we land the left toes. We come up to our high lunge. And from our high lunge, we're going to drop that left heel down, open that chest to the left, rebending into that right knee to find our warrior two, Virabhadrasana 2. Grounding through that right foot. Notice how it really hasn't moved at all since we grounded it in low lunge. It's still there supporting us. Bringing those shoulders up over the hips. Arms out from the shoulders, gaze over that right hand, flip that right palm, bring it up and back. Finding a reverse warrior or peaceful warrior. Then we'll come forward, back towards warrior two. As we bring our right forearm down to the right thigh, left arm comes up towards the ceiling or along that left ear to find our extended side angle, Parzo Konasana. And then we're just going to rotate those hands down to the mat, pivot up on those left toes, bring that right foot back in between the hands, then step that right foot back to plank. Find a vinyasa or move to downward facing dog. Then we lift that left heel. Bring your left knee towards your nose so you can plant that left foot between your hands. Drop the right knee, come up to low lunge. Find that grounding of that left foot. Notice that even though we find all those poses, it's going to stay exactly where it is right now. So when you're ready, bringing that right knee up in front of you, one-legged Tadasana. Then we bring it back behind us, finding that warrior three. Pausing for a moment. Then we land, right toes down for high lunge. This time we drop the right heel down as we open the chest to the right, bending into that left knee. Shoulders up over the hips as maybe we bend a little deeper. We gaze over that left hand, flip the palm, bring it up and back. Reverse or peaceful warrior. Then we come forward, left forearm down to the left thigh, right arm up towards the sky or alongside that right ear, Parzo Konasana, extended side angle. Then we'll rotate those hands down to the mat, pivot up on the right toes, step back to plank. We meet in down dog. And then we're going to find either that child's pose or any other pose that helps you find that constructive rest. Maybe that's coming up on the knees. Maybe that's grabbing water or a towel. We're going to take about 4 breath cycles here. We're going to find that same flow one more time, this time moving with the breath just like we do in sun salutations, kind of coming back to that breath to body movement. And then we're going to come down to the mat, slow it down, cool it down for a moment before we find that final Shavasana. Let's find one more breath here. Then we'll make our way back to downward facing dog. We're going to start in down dog this time. So on your next inhale, we lift the right heel up towards the ceiling. Exhale, we bring that right leg forward to plant between the hands, drop the left knee. So on the inhale, we rise up to low lunge. We stay for the exhale, making sure we find that grounding of that right foot. And then on our inhale, we step that left knee forward, coming to one-legged Tadasana. Exhale, find warrior three. Inhale, high lunge. Exhale, warrior two. Inhale, reverse or peaceful warrior. Exhale, extended side angle. Then hands come down to the mat, pivot up on those left toes. Chance for a vinyasa or just move back to downward facing dog. One more side, then we're coming down to the mat. We lift that left heel on the inhale. Exhale, that leg comes forward so the left foot plants between your hands. Drop the right knee. Inhale, low lunge. Exhale, we stay to find that grounding of that left foot. Inhale, bring that right knee up in front of you, one-legged Tadasana. Then we come back on the exhale, finding warrior three. Land with the inhale for high lunge. Exhale, warrior two. Inhale, reverse warrior. Exhale, extended side angle. Then hands down to frame that left foot. Pivot up on the right toes. Last chance for a vinyasa here. We'll all come to downward facing dog eventually. Let's take a big breath here in down dog. Inhale through the nose. Fill up all the way. Inside out of the mouth. Then on your next inhale, lift that right heel up. This time we're going to bring that right leg forward for half pigeon. So that leg comes down so that right knee is either right behind the right wrist or maybe a little bit to the outside of that right wrist. That right foot behind the left wrist. That shin Doesn't need to be parallel. It can be at this diagonal. But we're going to stay up a little bit high here in this kind of high pigeon variation, proud pigeon, just so we know that we have that stable base. Those hips aren't kind of unequal, but they're as balanced as they can be. And if you'd like to take a block to place underneath that right hip to find a little bit more stability, you can. And then from here, if you'd like, we can fold that chest down towards the mat, finding that sleeping pigeon. In these kind of final poses, before we move towards Shavasana, we can come back to cultivating that balanced breath like we did at the beginning of class. Taking your time, knowing that we're going to limit the movement from pose to pose. Once you find that sensation, you find that stretch, you find your place, you can start to find the breath. And then we're going to bring our hands back underneath our shoulders, rising back up towards that tall or that proud pigeon so we can tuck the back toes, step that right leg back, coming back towards downward facing dog. Then when you're ready, we'll lift that left heel up, bring that left leg forward, finding that half pigeon on the second side. Just like we talked about in the high lunge, as you find this tall, proud pigeon, assess if you need maybe that block. If it feels like there's too much effort to hold up that left hip, find that extra support so you can find enough ease that you can find that stretch in the hip. Just because you didn't need a block on the last side doesn't mean you don't need one here. Treat each side individually. But once you have that base, if you'd like, you can start to sleep that chest down towards the mat. You'll be coming down to blocks, coming down to the forehead, forearms. Maybe that forehead even rests on the mat. Finding that stillness. Maybe that breath is starting to deepen. Let's take one more breath here. And then we'll bring our hands underneath the shoulders, kind of coming back up to that tall or proud pigeon. This time we're just going to roll to the outside of the left hip so we can swing those legs out in front of us, coming to our staff pose or Dandasana. So in this pose, our legs are long out in front of us, coming to that kind of L seat. We're trying to find, just like we did in that beginning seat, that nice tall posture of the spine. Sometimes it feels like it's hard to find. Maybe there's rounding of that lower back. That's when we can start to find some props, maybe like a blanket, to elevate those hips a little bit, maybe helping us find that nice tall posture to start. But once you find this L seat, this Dandasana, we're going to find a really nice tall spine. Maybe inhale to find that length. And on our exhale, we start to bring that chest forward, trying to keep that straight spine for as long as we can. Then once you feel like you can't keep that any longer, we can start to round down. Bring that chin down towards the chest. Maybe feeling that stretch through the upper back, the neck, the lower back, the hamstrings. You can always reach for the toes, reach for the feet. Finding this Paschimottanasana, this big forward fold. Let's take one more breath here. And then we'll gently rise up. Coming back to that Dandasana, the L seat. If you have any props underneath the hips, moving them out of the way. And we're just going to lower ourselves down to the mat, maybe coming down to the forearms until finally those shoulders come down to the mat. We feel that grounding, that support of the mat underneath us. And from here, we're going to bring our knees in towards our chest, bringing those hands up to the top of the knees or the top of the shins so we can pull in, feeling that compression in the front of the hips, maybe that gentle rounding in the lower back. And then we're going to bring those knees back up over center as we gently twist those legs over to the left, coming to this supine twist. We want to focus on trying to keep that right shoulder heavy. So we continue to open up through the abdomen, the chest. Maybe that right arm can come out to the side. Maybe the gaze can come out to the right. Then we'll bring those knees back up through center as we bring those knees over to the right, finding that supine twist the opposite direction. This time the left shoulder stays heavy. The gaze comes over to the left. And we're going to bring those knees up through center, pulling those knees in one more time, giving ourselves kind of one last hug here, this big squeeze. And I want you to release those legs out long. Release those arms alongside you on the mat. Finding your Shavasana pose. If this is uncomfortable in the lower back and you want to plant the feet or bring a prop underneath the knees, you can. But we're looking for the closest thing to effortlessness we can find. Trying to find any tension, any muscular effort in the body and releasing it. And just feel yourself completely supported, completely held by the ground. Release into it. And instead of trying to control that breath, I want you to bring every ounce of attention, every ounce of effort you have, and bring it to paying attention to that breath. Find one sensation about it. Maybe the feeling of the air passing in and out of the nostrils. Maybe the rise and fall of the chest or stomach. And just put all of your focus there. That mind at any points drifts away, attaches to one of those turning thoughts in the mind, taking you away from your mat. All you have to do is bring that focus back to the breath. We're going to end our class here today in Shavasana. Stay here as long as you'd like. But before you get up, take the time to thank yourself. Give yourself gratitude for showing up for you, showing up on your mat today. Thank your body for supporting you, your breath for guiding you, and your mind for staying present, if even only for one moment. And I bow to you as well. Thank you for sharing your practice, joining along today. Have a great day.